Joe, it's Booker Prize Shortlist time, and hot off the press, we'll be bringing you this year's final 6 books.
It is, and that's not all. To celebrate the announcement of this year's shortlist, we'll be debating what we think the best Booker-shortlist of all time is, and we're going to be doing that with a really special guest.
This is Bob Jackson, who's a man who's not only read every single book that's ever been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, but more astonishingly still, as far as I can see, he's remembered them all. So he'll be bringing his encyclopedic knowledge to bear on proceedings.
I'm Jo Hanya.
And I'm James Walton, and welcome to the Booker Prize podcast. Okay then, Joe, let's give the listeners the big 6 of this year's Booker Prize shortlist. They are Prophet Song by Paul Lynch, Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein, If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery,
And The Bee Sting by Paul Murray, Western Lane by Chetna Maru, and This Other Eden by Paul Harding.
So first reactions, Joe? I mean, my first reaction is that's got to be the first ever Booker shortlist with 3 people called Paul on it.
I think they should have a convention, Paul Con. It would be great. My reaction is that I actually finished The Bee Sting at the beginning of this week, and I violently sobbed, really ugly cried for about 400 pages of that book. It's 600 pages long, so that's quite an achievement, isn't it? Yeah. And my partner found me on the sofa about 11 o'clock at night, just going and he was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "It's not me, it's Paul Murray who's done this to me." So I think that's really, really well deserved. And I've also started Western Lane by Chetna Maru, which I'm actually really, really enjoying, but in a much calmer, kind of collected way.
Yeah, well, okay, you put me to shame a bit there, Joe, because I've read none of them at this stage, but that will be put right because we're going to bring 2 podcasts, count them 2, in which we discuss in some depth the whole shortlist. So that'll be, obviously, mathematicians can work out 3 per episode, and that'll be coming up in October.
James and I had a fabulous night last night at the National Portrait Gallery at the shortlist announcement, quaffing champagne,
That's right,
oozing intelligence, walking around.
Hanging out with our literary mates. I even got out of my Beatles t-shirt, got into my glad rags, and that was for that swanky do at the National Portrait Gallery where we heard those 6 books announced. Can't wait to get stuck into them, and we got stuck into the champagne.
So all that being said, I think we should get to the main body of this episode because our guest is genuinely phenomenal. He is a man who has outdone both James and I by reading all 315 Booker novels. I mean, truly putting us to shame. And we thought, who better than that kind of expert to debate the best shortlist of all time? And to do that, we've got a special guest with us, Bob Jackson. Hi, Bob.
Hello.
Well, I suppose let's have a few fairly obvious but interesting questions to me anyway. What's your favourite ever winner?
My favourite ever winner is and there's not much of a contest here because it's a fabulous book. It's the Narrow Road to the Deep North.
Richard Flanagan.
Yes, about the Burma and the death railway and prisoners of war. He's Australian, and it was based on an Australian character. His father, I think it was his father, was actually a prisoner of war. And it was the winner in 2014, I believe.
Yeah, okay. It is a terrific book.
Powerful book.
Yeah,
really emotionally powerful.
And least favourite? Winner. Still with winners.
Least favourite winner?
Least favourite winner.
I'm in good company, I think, here, because one of the judges at the time said, if this wins, I'm packing up because it's bleep. Create your own adjective. And it's how late it was, how late, James Kelman.
Which I really like. I think I'm about the I'm
great.
The only person. For people who don't know it, it's essentially a sweary stream of consciousness from a Glaswegian drunk.
That's a perfect summary, yeah. I wish you'd just written that and then submitted it.
I suppose it's not exactly an easy read, but it stirred me.
Yeah.
I guess my questions are a bit nerdier. Did you have a system while you were reading? Did you go chronologically or just by taste? Or?
Not to start with. Certainly not by taste. But when I started this, I sort of mentally piled up 300 plus books in front of me and thought, I'm never going to do this.
Yeah.
So I just picked books as they came along on the bookshelf, just had them in a queue. I think I put them in alphabetical order, but not in year order. And then I was maybe a third of the way through and thought, this has got to be a better way of doing this, because I'm not really enjoying the comparisons of the 6 shortlisted ones in any one year. So I then, quite early in the process, started to look at each year in a block, which by and large was doable, with a few exceptions, because some books were tough to get hold of.
I mean, some people, obviously not us, on the Booker Prize podcast, have used the word Booker novel in a slightly derogatory way. Were there any books that made you think, oh God, here we go again?
No.
Okay, good. Oh, there we are. So we're fine. So those people are all wrong, okay?
There are a lot of people out there who have an immediate negative attitude towards the Booker Prize. It's elitist. It in no way represents current global literature in any way, and it's just about the money. That's cosmology.
There's not much money in it anyway. What's 50 grand in the current
These
economy?
days, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, we promised right at the start that we're not a propaganda podcast, but I do think the Booker Prize is pretty high-minded.
Yeah,
I really
yeah.
do think it sets out to find the best novel of the year.
So, Bob, if we're going to widen the scope a little bit
Sure.
to all shortlisted novels, what has been your favourite?
Can I just start by saying I finished the 315 books as were the shortlist up to and including 2021 in October 2022. Actually finished the 315th when the winner of that year was announced, just by a fluke, I think. But I'd got 2 books in mind as I finished the whole thing, which seemed to be fairly equal as my favourites. One we mentioned, which was The Narrow Road to the Deep North. And the other one, which is over that period of time since then, has really risen to become my clear favourite. And that's A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And it's the most extraordinary book. It's a difficult book. It's brutal. It's raw. But the characters she creates, the principal 4 best mates living in New York with Jude and his other, they just stuck with me. And I still feel a real affinity to those characters, and particularly Jude. And I thought the book was absolutely tremendous. But more so than that, it's just the whole offer in that book. I thought it's tremendous.
Okay, so now is perhaps the time to move on.
The plan is we're going to try and between ourselves agree, which might be ambitious, on the best ever shortlist. We've all brought 2 along,
Yep.
which we're going to explain sort of, I think we'll go around, do one each. So Bob, what's your first nomination for best ever Booker shortlist ever?
1985.
Uh-huh.
And 1985, the winner was the brilliant The Bone People.
By Carey Hume, and another one that divided people.
Yes, it has. Yes, it has. But I just love the way the book starts and how she develops the young child's personality and all that follows. I thought it was tremendous.
I mean, this was, again, just for people who don't know, this is set among the sort of Aboriginal people of New Zealand,
Correct.
isn't it? And
It is.
in fact, she didn't turn up, but she sent
2
And
Maori women.
to 2 Maori women who sort of ululated their way to the stage.
For the acceptance.
Yeah, for the acceptance. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. But also in that year, there are a couple of other really crucial books to me in terms of my enjoyment of the whole process. There are 2 of my top 10. I did this a mental sort of top 10 and made some notes. And 2 of my top 10 are Doris Lessing's The Good Terrorist, which is a simple, charming book in many respects, but it works on a number of levels, and the character and the innocence of that character, and then the sheer carnage that develops from that innocence in the way she goes about delivering her belief in London in the 60s is just really, really well articulated and put together. The second one in my top 10 in that year is Last Letters from Hav by Jan Morris. It's the only travel book in the Booker-shortlist library,
Wow.
but it's about a place that doesn't exist. It's a really, really clever piece of writing. Jan Morris was a journalist of some note. She was the Sunday Times correspondent on the 53 Everest expedition. And it's about Hav, which is a fictional country, but I guarantee if you read this, you'll be going to the internet trying to find out where Hav is. She makes it so real, but it's completely invented. A charming, charming piece of writing. And then also in there, with those 3, that's The Bone People, Good Terrorist, and Last Letters from Hav. There's an Iris Murdoch, fantastic. Only 2 to be shortlisted 6 times in the history of the whole thing. And then a charming...
And that's The Good Apprentice, the Iris Murdoch.
It is, The Good Apprentice, I apologise, yeah. And then J.L. Carr, The Battle of Pollock's Crossing, who's been shortlisted twice, Jim Carr. Short books, both of his books are really quite short books.
What was the A Month in the...
A Month in the Country,
yes.
yeah, about a war veteran
Yes.
coming back and finding love and losing it through his own nervousness, really. Yeah. Illiwacker by Peter Carey. Yeah, what do you say about Peter Carey? It was one of his early books, just fantastic, just mental. The 139-year-old Illiwacker, which is defined as a con man, basically. You know, and I think it catapulted him into the public eye, that book.
Yeah, it was. That was a big breakthrough, yeah.
It was a really, really good read. So the fact that there are 2 books amongst the 6 in my top 10, the fact that the winner I heartily approved of, and it could have gone to any of 4, in my opinion, that year, the 3 I mentioned, plus Illiwacker. And I just, having gone through the something like 54, 55 lists, that's the one I came up with.
I'm going to start off with 1989. I mean, I have various reasons for this one. It's partly on the strength of the novels, but also on the strength of the writers and of the kind of psychosocial affair around the ceremony that year. So the shortlist comprised James Kelman's Disaffection, which are you going to continue defending Kelman for me here?
I love a Disaffection.
James.
It ends, as far as I remember, with a sort of about 800-page thing of 2 brothers getting drunk together and just talking.
Yeah,
that's my kind of book.
But it's a week in the life of a thoroughly disenchanted 29-year-old teacher who, I guess, in the manner of a lot of sort of social service workers, is just almost completely given up on the moral or sort of politically structural worth of his job. And there is a lot of kind of drunken ranting, and there is a lot of chasing after another very pretty teacher down the school corridors. The next book on the shortlist is Margaret Atwood's Cat's Eye, about a painter called Elaine, who sort of over the course of the novel revisits a very strange set of friendships in her school years. It's sort of a classic tale of schoolyard bullies, but quite distinctly feminine. And at the time, it was sort of seen to overthrow quite twee narratives about sort of all women being best friends in the pursuit of feminism. Then we have Restoration by Rose Tremaine, which is about a man called Merivale who sort of ends up in the court of King Charles because he cures his dog. And it's about his sort of fall from grace and gradual coming to self-awareness. Next, there's John Banville's The Book of Evidence, which is a prison kind of monologue or testimony by a man called Freddie Montgomery. It's quite surreal and gruesome. Then Jigsaw by Sybil Bedford, which is actually, it strikes me as quite a kind of Jean Rhys novel set in the interwar years. Semi-autobiographical, in which the narrator, Billy, tells the kind of story of her childhood and later of her kind of years on the coast of France, kind of surrounded by artists and intellectuals who show her how to kind of live a proper life. And then there is, of course, the winner, which I think most kind of Booker oriented people will have read, Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, which concerns Stevens, the butler, as he negotiates working for a new American master and thinks over the mistakes of his past, which contain primarily working for a fascist aristocrat and letting the love of his life, Mrs. Kenton, go. He also spends a lot of time learning how to banter. And I've chosen 1989, just slightly convoluted. I was born in 1997, but I feel a weird sense of nostalgia over this list. A lot of the books concern a kind of form of alienation.
Thanks, Joe. That is a strong list. Shall I go for my first one?
Yes, James, go ahead. Please tell
My
us
first
yours.
one is 1984. And there aren't that many writers, I think, that I've read all the books of, but there's two on this list. And in both cases, it's my favourite of all, which is Flaubert's Parrot by Julian Barnes and Small World by David Lodge. So the way Flaubert's Parrot works is it's about a guy who has lost his wife has died, and he's trying to make sense of it. And he tries to make sense of it through Flaubert, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of displacement, but the displacement doesn't quite work. I mean, there's a lot of emotion in there. It's sort of cliche to say about Julian Barnes that he's best as an essayist, and I don't think that's true, because this book is, I think, pretty heartbreaking too. But he is very good at imparting information and just all sorts of stuff that crosses his mind. There's a great section on literary mistakes, whether they matter. So remember there's the bit where in Lord of the Flies where Piggy's glasses are used to set fire to something. They couldn't have been used to set fire to him because he's short-sighted. So the rays would have diverged rather than converged. It's one of the funniest books, I think, that's been on the Booker-shortlisted.
I think it's the funniest of the three.
Yeah,
In the,
I think it's his best book.
yeah, Morris Zapp. What a character.
And then there was the hot favourite, which was Empire of the Sun by J.G. Ballard, later a Steven Spielberg movie. In fact, the bookie stopped taking bets on it. It's based on his J.G. Ballard's own childhood as in Shanghai when the Japanese invaded. But oddly enough, it lost out to Hotel du Lac by Anita Bruckner, which is by far the quietest book on the shortlist. I mean, Anita Bruckner is sometimes stereotyped writing about lonely cardigan-wearing spinsters with nice mansion flats in London.
Sad girl lit, is it?
It sort of is. Though I've got a friend who swears there's no Anita Bruckner novel in which a sort of lonely old spinster doesn't slop food into the bin after the failure of her beau to turn up for a meal. And Hotel du Lac is about a lonely woman. Edith Hope writes romantic novels, is the main character. And she has had an affair that's ended in, well, she's had some romantic disgrace that you find out about back in London, and she's come to Lake Geneva Hotel there, and she observes the guests, and not a colossal amount happens, but she observes them so beadily and observes herself so beadily. I mean, in a way, I suppose I do think, as many people did at the time, it was lucky to win, but I'm sort of pleased it did. And there is also, so I think for a good shortlist, you want a sort of little bit of controversy, which is that against all of those books, Anita Bruckner's Hotel du Lac wins. And then the other two I can't claim to be entirely familiar with, but they are I do know they're both by extremely good authors. Anita Desai with In Custody. And then According to Mark by Penelope Lively, who went on to win the Booker 3 years later with Moon Tiger. So that seems a pretty good shortlist to me.
So, Bob, what's your next shortlist for us?
The year 2000 is my second year. And in that year, the wonderful Margaret Atwood won the Booker with The Blind Assassin, which is a superbly constructed double story, if you will. It's about a rich Canadian industrialist and his family who fall on hard times, and a woman who is writing a book called The Blind Assassin, which is a bit of a mental plot. But the way that Atwood weaves the two things together keeps bringing you back to the present as it was. This is going back into the 1900s, 1920s, and it's got one of the best opening lines in any Booker book, which is she quotes a year and says, "The year my sister drove her car off the bridge and into the river." And you think, where is this going? It's not the best opening sentence, but it's one of the best. So also in that year, Trezza Azzopardi, The Hiding Place, a fabulous novel set in the Maltese community of Tiger Bay in the 60s. And The Hiding Place is because one of the many children of the principal character is a young girl who hides in a particular room in the house because her father is somewhat violent. But it opens a whole new world, really, to me as not having any experience of how diverse and a diverse mix Cardiff and Tiger Bay particularly was in the 50s and 60s, with Somalis, with Maltese, people from all over the world coming into the city through trade, through seaborne trade, and a very tight book and tight story. And if Atwood hadn't been nominated that year, I think that may well have clinched it. Michael Collins, The Keepers of Truth, that was not a book that I would go overboard with, and that was almost stopped me choosing 2000 as my second list, but it didn't because there is a Katsuya Ishiguro in there, When We Were Orphans, a fabulous, fabulous book, like I think all his 4 shortlisted books, and indeed his other handful of novels. Matthew Neal, English Passengers. Have you guys read that?
I have read
I
that.
haven't read it.
That's an astonishing book, actually.
It's just a romp through seafaring, nefarious, and it's just fantastic. It's fundamentally about some guy in the 19th century seeking the Garden of Eden, and he's on board this ship to get passage to the far side of the world. But these guys don't realise they're on board this ship, which is a Manx Isle of Man smuggling ship with a classic double-hulled, double skin, and stashed between the 2 skins of the ship is all sorts of stuff. And it's a romp, really. And it's a very, very clever comedic novel, but most enjoyable. The Deposition of Father McGreevy is a strange little novel, Brian Doherty, and it starts off with a guy accidentally overhearing a conversation in a pub in London about a village in Carey where he grew up, and some sort of strange goings on with regard to the Catholic. Why should I be surprised about strange goings on in Ireland with regard to Catholic priests? But he goes back to Ireland to try and investigate what's actually happened in this particular village.
There was one of the early ones to do that, there wasn't it, in a way?
It is quite early on, yeah. Before anything really hit the fan.
Yeah, before it became almost a sort of cliche of Irish literature, really. I mean,
Okay, well, I haven't sort of ranked my 2 lists. For me, they're sort of on equal par, and I think that's because I've chosen them more on the basis of personal preference than anything else. But my second shortlist is from 2016, so I'm bringing us further up to date, and I've chosen this because I'm always the youngest person in the room recording this podcast. So I have to say, I'm really embarrassed to say that the first time that I sort of really properly engaged with a Booker longlist or a Booker shortlist as it was being announced and as speculation was sort of rising around the press as to who would win, and the first time that, Booker took on any sort of importance in my consciousness was in 2013. And I was, how old was I? I was 16. And I was trying to kind of think from that point on, in a kind of contemporary to me sense, is there a shortlist that has been remarkable? Because I don't just want to look back into a past I never lived in, James. I want to be proud of the present I exist in.
I think that's allowed.
And actually, when I stopped to look at the list for 2016, I found that it was full of novels that have actually, in one way or another, been quite formative to the literary landscape that I work in, or which have served as really good examples of the current literary landscape that I work and write and read in, and that these books have probably shaped not only my thought but the thought of a lot of my peers. So we have on the list Madeline Thiene's Do Not Say We Have Nothing, which is a kind of epic saga spanning 3 generations from the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949 to the book's present day, and the protagonist sort of seeks to kind of create a book of records of her ancestral history. That kind of puts me in mind of a whole set of books that I encountered. My first literary job was as a bookseller in Waterstones, and at the time books like Pachinko by Min Jin Lee or Homecoming by Yagayazi were really just sweeping everyone's consciousness, and so there is sort of that book really encapsulated that movement for me. Then we have Deborah Levy's Hot Milk, which is this kind of very short, very sweaty kind of mother-daughter psychological meltdown. Deborah Levy, for me, has been quite an influential writer. I think it's as a result of reading writers like her that I write quite short novels that tend to... Actually, maybe I write sad girl lit James, now that I think about it.
But of the classiest possible kind.
Of the classiest possible kind. Deborah Levy's really good at making sort of what seems like just ordinary family drama into a thriller. And that's what Hot Milk does really well. And I see its kind of children being spawned in a lot of what we've dubbed as sad girl lit in our present moment. There's Atessa Moshfegh's Eileen. Atessa Moshfegh, Eileen, I should say, first of all, is just the weirdest, just most flatulent, dirty novel ever. It's about the central character, Eileen, who lives with her alcoholic father and works in a prison, and who is absolutely enamored with this woman she meets called Rebecca St. John. Eileen regularly purges herself. She has an eating disorder. It's just like a deeply nasty, unpleasant book in the way that a lot of Moshfegh's work is. And Moshfegh, since 2016, I suppose, has become another sort of cultural icon for my generation. There's a whole swathe of young women on TikTok touting My Year of Rest and Relaxation in the way that, you know, holding a Joan Didion novel used to be cool. There's also All That Man Is by David Saloy. A series of short stories that kind of take you through, I guess, the phases of life.
This is the book about 9. There are 9 characters, aren't there?
Yeah,
different
sort of
ages,
set up.
and then he kind of draws them together.
Yeah, and quite an episodic structure. And then Graham McCrae Burnett's His Bloody Project, in which isn't so much a kind of whodunit as a whydunit. It's a book centered around a murder trial that has kind of gripped the British public, and it contains the memoir of the, is he 17? Of this 17-year-old boy on trial who seeks absolutely no absolution, who confesses to all these murders. And so really through this memoir, through newspaper clippings and etc., you're less looking for, you know, who the murderer is, more what his motives are, why he's so morally corrupt, you know, how can he not feel any sort of need for absolution or moral resolution. And the winner for that year, Paul Beatty's The Sellout, whose protagonist, in a bid to put his small town in California back on the map, decides to reinstate segregation and slavery. And which actually you can listen to an episode on from James and I on your very own Booker podcast.
Very much so. Friend of the show. That's interesting that a lot of the things that are playing out now, you identify around 2016.
I think it's just an incredibly representative shortlist of sort of where we were and where we've ended up. So James, what's your final selection?
I've gone sort of modern, 2005.
It's a good one, though.
No, it is a good one. It was won by The Sea by John Banville, which is, it is exquisitely written, as everybody always says about Banville, but this one particularly. Retired art historian looking back on his entire life with particular reference to the death of his loved ones. It's nice to see a work of art win the Booker Prize, someone said, but unfortunately it was Banville himself. There's also a quiz question on this one, which is, in what way was the 1978 Booker winner twice the novel that won in 2005?
Pass.
It's slightly cornily. 1978, The Sea, and this is just The Sea. Come on. And then, but it was a close run thing. Apparently, Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro again. He's showing up quite a lot. It seems to be as usual with Ishiguro, like, you know, The Remains of the Day is not a book about a butler particularly. It's a book about how you work with regret and so on. And in this particular case, I think it's about, as people will know, sort of dystopian book in which people are bred for their organs, certain people, and they know they're going to be dead when they're 30, by the time they're 30. So the question we all think is, what's the point of life if you're going to be dead when you're 30? What's the point of anything? And then, what's the point of life when you're going to be dead by 70 or 80? I think it's a book about lifespan, really. And and again, done with his usual brilliance and subtlety. Julian Barnes making another appearance with Arthur and George.
Tremendous book.
It is a tremendous book.
Tremendous book.
Both characters from real life. George Edeliji, who was wrongly imprisoned, sort of Asian background, wrongly imprisoned for killing farm animals in the early part of the 20th century. And Arthur is none other than Arthur Conan Doyle, who neatly enough turned detective to clear George's name. And in the traditional Barnes way, we learn a lot about Doyle along the way. Just lots of interesting information thrown in. On Beauty by Zadie Smith. Joe and I argue Zadie quite a lot, but I think On Beauty is the sort of perfect balance between her early funny ones and her later more somber work.
I'm going to stick by NW being just a masterpiece.
Yeah, I do like the early funny ones, but I do, but this is funny too. But it's also it's really funny, but it's also got probably a bit more depth to it than the early funny ones. And hoping that some listeners will remember that Howard from On Beauty was in our book of Love Island, punching above his weight with Mark Pesser from Paul Beatty's The Sellout.
Absolutely.
And then Marianne from Sally Rooney's Normal People, where tragically their shared discussions of Marxism weren't enough to get them to the final. Although, rather to Marianne's dismay, they did stay together for a while. A Long, Long Way by Sebastian Barry. And slightly mixed feelings about Sebastian Barry over the years, but this is one of his early ones, and his subject for a while was basically what happened to his family, which was people who went away to fight for the British Army during the First World War, because Ireland was part of Britain, and then they come back and they're suddenly traitors because they've been fighting for Britain.
Absolutely.
They've been fighting for Britain, and now Ireland has had the revelation. I mean, it's
Again,
a great subject.
Stunningly revelatory book.
And also Ali Smith's The Accidental, which also won the Orange Prize, and the Whitbread Book of the Year in that same year. The Whitbread Book of the Year I always quite liked because it then became the Costas. But this was before it became the Costas. So there would be a novel, a first novel, non-fiction and poetry and children's, I think, and then you had to pick the best book of the year of all of those. Right. And it was once put to the chairman of Whitbread Brewery, how can you compare all these different things? It's impossible. And he said, oh, it's easy enough. They do it at Crufts every year, which absolutely caused the steam to come out of the ears of everybody in Literary London. I rather liked. So anyway, that's my other one, 2005.
Very good.
Which is
very glamorous list, actually. Like a lot of those names, Ali Smith, Zadie Smith, Smiths actually.
Julian Barnes.
Julian Barnes, I mean, are now kind of being painted into the pantheon of, literary legends.
Everybody's, unfortunately, annoyingly, made a terrific case for 2 years each. We got 6, and for some reason, we've set ourselves, or been set, the task of finding the best ever Booker-shortlist ever, etc.
It's quite easy in my mind, James.
So, first of all, I suppose, does anybody want to withdraw one of theirs? That would make it easier. Yeah, I think, Bob, you've already...
Well, if we have to arrive at 1 from 6, then we're all going to have to withdraw 1, aren't we? Yes, I'll withdraw. With great reluctance, I'll withdraw 2000.
Okay, so you're leaving... You're
1985.
1985. Joe?
I don't know, James. I kind of want to know what
past or present? That's what you're faced with, isn't it?
I know.
You've got an absolute generational agony to face. Life before you were there, or what what spurs you on to... Yeah, it's a tricky one.
I hate to say it, but I think it is better. The books are better quality, and everyone smoked indoors, and it was just so bitchy and glamorous. I'm going to go for 1989.
To retain. You're going to retain that one?
Yeah, I'm going to keep it. I'm going to keep 1989.
Wow.
I'm going to toss 2016 out the window. It was a terrible year anyway. Trump, Brexit, who wants it?
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I think, because it suggests something about decades of literature, I'm going to... 2005, I'm very sorry to say goodbye to you, but I'm going to stick with 1984. I would have chosen
2005 as the winner if you'd kept it, James. This is the thing.
Oh, I've blown it because I'm sticking with 9. Oh, come on. So, rather interestingly, we're left with a full 80s lineup. 1985 with The Bone People by Carey Hume, Illiwacker Peter Carey, The Battle of Pollux by J.L. Carr, Doris Lessing's The Good Terrorist, Last Letters from Hav by Jan Morris, and The Good Apprentice by Iris Murdoch. Previous year, Anita Bruckner, Hotel du Lac, J.G. Ballard's Empire of the Sun, Julian Barnes' Flaubert's Parrot, Anita Desai in Custody, Penelope Lively According to Mark, and David Lodge's Small World. And that's not enough 80s for you. We've also got 1989, won by Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, with the shortlisted authors being Margaret Atwood with Cat's Eye, John Banville, The Book of Evidence, Sybil Bedford, Jigsaw, James Kelman, A Disaffection, and Rose Tremaine, Restoration. I'm going to suggest something quite controversial, but quite bookery. When We're All Stuck, Compromise Candidate, 2005.
I would have chosen 2005 as an overall winner. But failing that, I would have gone for my own 1989.
Bob?
Well, with Julian Barnes, Sebastian Barry, and the Shiguro, yes, it's an extremely strong.
On Beauty as well.
Yeah. But would I yield if my arm was right up my back and I was scratching my own head? Would I yield?
Interesting image.
Yes, there you go. I like to paint these pictures, James. Would I yield 1985 with the Bone People and Illiwacker?
Can I just say, Illiwacker, everyone says roistering, romp. It bored me rigid.
Did it?
Really did. And I read it in Australia. It was one of these things where I was a big fan of, you read a book where where it's set is such a thing to do.
Yes.
And so I was going to Australia, I thought I'm going to take Illiwacker. Everyone says it's fantastic. Romps along. God, just absolutely.
Did it really?
Yeah, there's pictures, quite a lot of pictures of me on that holiday, I think, with it sort of across my face as I'm sleeping. And the Bone People I haven't read, but I can't say I love the sound of.
We really need to come to a decision, guys.
I'm not
I'm sensitive.
Yeah, I just to clarify here, you Joe would go with 05, would you?
I would go with 05 with 89 as a runner-up.
And you obviously would go with 05.
I think 05. So I think that win. I think we can.
So
Well, it's too-
I think
bullied Bob
who's actually read all the books as well. but how about we suggest that from our careful analysis of all the best short, that we pronounce 1980s the best decade, but the best single year 2005.
How elegant is that as a solution? Well done. Agreed.
So after that, classic Booker. No, compromise would be too fair. We're thrashing it out in a fair way. We are left with the 1980s definitely being the best decade, but the best single year being 2005 for John Banville, The Sea, Julian Barnes, Arthur and George, Sebastian Barry, A Long, Long Way, Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go, Ali Smith, The Accidental, and Zadie Smith on Beauty. And I must say, when you do read this, it does sound pretty strong.
I'm coming towards the conclusion that you're right.
I wonder if
Perfect.
this is how the judges feel.
There'll be one that, yes, you'll be the Rabbi Julia Neuberger, will you? It's an absolute disgrace.
Yes.
That book, that's crap, that shortlist.
It was the word you used.
Yeah,
it
it was,
was.
yeah,
I
it
didn't
was,
like to
yeah.
say it on there.
No, indeed.
But now you have.
Yeah, sorry. But there we are. So there we have our answer to the best ever Booker shortlist, just about. But we commend all those years as well.
Yes,
and
indeed.
thanks enormously to Bob.
It's been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you
No,
both.
thanks. It's really been great to have you, Bob. Thanks so much.
So, 2005, and if you agree with that or indeed disagree with that, there is a poll on our website where you can vote on your favourite shortlist ever at thebookerprizes.com/best-shortlist.
Also, we've recently launched a Booker Prize book club on Facebook. So to find out more about that, head to facebook.com/thebookerprizes.
That's it for this week. Don't forget to follow us to catch our 2 special episodes in which we'll take you through all 6 shortlisted books for 2023 in October.
You can find out more about this year's shortlist at thebookerprizes.com. And remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Substack at The Booker Prizes. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.
The Booker Prize podcast is hosted by Joe Hamya and me, James Walton. It's produced and edited by Kevin Miolo. And the executive producer is John Davenport. It's a Daddy Super Yacht production for The Booker Prizes.